Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Gable. I'm the designated federal officer for the Defense Innovation Board. I would like to thank Dr. Lander and the Broad Institute for welcoming us into this amazing facility. If you have not done so already, please silence your electronic devices. In addition to the board members who are sitting here in front of you today, we do have some people joining us by telephone. We have Ms. Marnie Levine and Jen Polka, and we will also be joined by Walter Isaacson. Today's meeting is being recorded and live streamed to allow members of the public to attend the meeting virtually. Thank you to the Defense Media Activity for providing their expert support to this event. Welcome to all of our in-person and virtual attendees. As we begin this public meeting, allow me to share a few procedural remarks. This board is a discretionary, independent advisory board operated under the Federal Advisory Committee Act and the Government in the Sunshine Act. The board will now convene its public session. Today's meeting was announced in the Federal Register, posted today. In that notice, the public was invited to submit written comments for the board members to consider. 5 written comments were received in advance of today's public meeting and will be provided to the board. There have been a few changes to today's agenda as published in the Federal Register notice. First, we have one expert presenter update, which is included in the program that you received coming in. And additionally, there were no closed meetings today. And finally, the corrected Federal Register notice will be published with these changes. Depending on time constraints, there may be an opportunity for members of the public to provide verbal comments to the board. This is not a question and answer session. With that, I now turn the meeting over to Dr. Lander for welcoming remarks.
Well, I'd like to welcome everybody here to the Broad Institute of MIT and Harvard. We're delighted to have everyone here today. And I'm a member of the Defense Innovation Board, but also the director of the Broad Institute, so it gives me special pleasure to welcome everybody here and to make our facility available for this public meeting of the DIB. The DIB is usually holds its public meetings in Washington. We've had one public meeting elsewhere on the West Coast, and now we've got one here in Boston. And I think it's very appropriate that the DIB rides circuit a little bit to the places of tremendous innovation around the country, and I'm just delighted that Boston was chosen and immediately suggested, come on over to the Broad. For those who don't know the Defense Innovation Board, and I know there are a number of people from the MIT and Harvard community and from the Broad Institute itself who are here, the purpose of this board is to provide the Secretary of Defense and others in the Defense Department with ideas on how to deliver more innovative solutions with respect to practices and operations, people and culture, technology and capabilities. That's a pretty broad mandate, but it's part of a historical triangle that has been so important in this country, involving academia, industry, and government. The sharing of insights and ideas amongst those 3 sectors has been tremendously important. For the academics who are here today, we appreciate that the entire innovation and research ecosystem that we take for granted grew out of the World War II experience. And many of the tools that we take for granted, the internet and GPS and things like that, grew out of efforts in the federal government, particularly led by the Defense Department. And so in some sense, the DIB is just part of this wonderful exchange of the Defense Department, and I think a very open-minded way saying, and what can we learn from these other sectors? What can we learn about practices that go on in the technology industry or the biotechnology industry and academia? And the DIB was created in 2016 for that purpose, to have that conversation take place in a very, very concrete way. And I've had the pleasure to serve on that under the chairmanship of Eric Schmidt, someone who's also known to this community here as well. I will just say it has been a tremendous pleasure to see how receptive the department has been to ideas. You might not think that the department moves quickly if you're on the outside, but it's just been wonderful to see, how much hunger and interest and energy there has been to look at innovative solutions wherever they may be found and ask how can they be translated to the important mission of the Department of Defense. So with that, I want to say thank you to all of you for coming. Welcome to our house here, and turn over to our chairman, Eric Schmidt.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Eric. And it's great to be back here. It's a place that I love, and the Broad is really the center, one of the sort of great American institutions in terms of the impact that it's had on our lives and will have on our lives going forward. In our case, we're happy to move around and we're happy to come visit here. It's interesting to realize the role that the federal government has played in the research at MIT and Harvard and in Cambridge in general. And you think about all the things that have happened in the last 50, 60 years related to federal government funding and so forth. So we're all part of an ecosystem that has produced extraordinary achievements for all of us. In our case, we've been wandering around for the last couple of years, visiting all sorts of parts of the military and providing advice through our recommendations, which we'll go through shortly. Since January, we visited a number of groups that were quite interesting. The Army Capabilities Integration Center, which is known at Fort Eustis, where we spent a fair amount of time trying to understand the Army innovation model. We visited the 480th ISR Wing at Langley Air Force Base in Virginia to understand their innovation that they do bottoms up. We spent quite a bit of time at Lockheed Martin's F-35 facility in Fort Worth to understand the software challenges that they're facing. And speaking of software, one of the things that we've been working on, which is the majority of our agenda today, is thinking about how we do a study of software acquisition reform. And as you'll hear, the military, shall we say, does software in a way that's not obvious to me and is probably pretty unfamiliar to the people here in the audience. And so we need to make some pretty strong recommendations, and this is the beginning of that discussion that we'll be having among ourselves. The goal of these kinds of studies is to do something different, because the previous studies, people write them, nothing happens. So our strategy is to do things which are actionable, like do this action, don't do this, stop doing this, do this other thing, and then see what the DoD likes and doesn't like about our recommendations. And so as part of this, we want you to participate in this as much as we can. So with that, I think, Josh, do you want to sort of talk about our agenda and what we're doing?
Thanks, Eric. Sure, I'll frame it up for us. So first of all, I just want to introduce our board members. You've heard from Dr. Lander and from Dr. Schmidt. I also wanted to introduce Milo Medine to Dr. Lander's right, and then we're also joined by the co-chairs of our software effort, Dr. McQuaid and Dr. Murray, who co-chair our science and technology group. So we're very fortunate from them. I also want to acknowledge Kate and Monica, in addition to Dr. Lander, because it takes a lot of effort to pull these things together, and they were incredibly supportive, and we really appreciate them making us feel welcome here, and all of you as well. If you haven't gotten a comment card yet when you walked in, please grab one, because you're going to need them later in the session. So as you mentioned, this is almost to the day our 2-year anniversary, and I'm actually quite awestruck by how much impact this board has had during that period of time. It's really quite impressive, and I think as they looked around and saw what are the challenges and innovation the department is facing, it turned out that software really seems to be the linchpin. So it's appropriate we've been asked to tackle that, and that is really the mission of our session today with all of you and the board members, to have this public deliberation about what the future of software in the department should look like, because we know that this is our greatest opportunity to have an impact on the future of our armed forces' competitiveness and our future strategy. So we are going to hear from a number of experts who we've chosen because they each bring a different perspective on this question of software. From the highest levels of leadership in the department down to people at the working level who are really making it happen, writing the code themselves, who are doing the programming. We have multiple services represented, different leaders, civilian leaders, and each of them is going to bring that different perspective, which is designed to enrich the board's view as they form their recommendations. In addition to that, we're going to have a great briefing from my colleague, Bess Dopkine, who actually spoke to the board a year ago about the department's deficiencies and challenges with data, and proved that she was the perfect person to lead a software effort. And so she's going to tell you a little bit about the approach that she is taking to doing this project. There's multiple lines of effort. We're looking at this problem from different angles. She's going to walk you through that. Then we're going to have a chance for our board members to walk through our initial hypotheses about what we think the core premises are for what a future of software would look like. We are calling those fittingly the 10 commandments of software, and they're going to walk you through each of them, and the board is going to discuss them. And the goal here is to test whether or not these hypotheses are correct, and we're going to try to fit data and experience and anecdotes to that. And then lastly, we get to hear from all of you about your views on this, and I will close out, as I always do, with an implementation update, which is the Office of the Secretary of Defense's presentation to the board about what the department has done with the recommendations the board has provided to date. And that is going to close us out. So without any further ado, Eric, unless there's anything else you'd like to add, we'll go straight to our first speaker, Lieutenant General Levy.
Well, thank you. I haven't said anything yet, so I don't know that it's worth applauding. So I'm going to ask you to turn around. I apologize for that. Eric, board members, everyone in the audience, good afternoon. The problem with software, and I think you captured it actually in your opening comments. You said software acquisition in the Department of Defense. Right there in that sentence, it's such a complicated topic that you couldn't even begin to unpack it given a year's worth of analysis because you used the word acquisition. If you ask 10 people what acquisition means, you'll get 12 answers. And so part of what I want to talk about is not just how we acquire it, but how we sustain it. And those terms are really important. They mean one thing in industry and academia, they mean something completely different inside of the department. So I'd like to begin, if you'll indulge me, with just one chart to show you where our organization fits inside of the United States Air Force. So I'm the commander of the Air Force Sustainment Center. That's 43,000 of your nation's sons and daughters, scattered in over 30 locations across the United States and abroad. We do a variety of logistics and sustainment. We own the supply chain. We do a large amount of the nuclear sustainment, fuels, munitions, aircraft overhaul, basically from factory to flight line and back again, lives inside of my organization. So we could probably do an hour on this, but I won't. I'll spare you. The reason I tell you that is inside of this sustainment organization that takes care of fielded weapon systems are 4,000 software professionals. So you look up at me, 4,000 software professionals. You probably didn't know that. So I want to talk a little bit about the organic software capability that lives inside of your United States Air Force, what it does for us, where it's working, but more importantly, where I think structurally we have impediments. And I think that would inform the board probably more than anything else. Next chart, please. So this is what software looks like as we transform ourselves from an Iron Age Air Force to an Information Age Air Force. Just the amount of code that's on the weapon system. And I believe one of you mentioned in your opening remarks, you talked about the ecosystem. I don't believe that the department yet understands that software goes way beyond the weapon system, but includes the entire ecosystem. And if there's not a process, a methodology, and more importantly, a financial stream and a human capital stream to support that ecosystem, then it doesn't matter how great the weapon system software is, the rest of it will rest on top of a shaky foundation. So for everyone in the audience, the level of complexity of software in our weapon systems is increasing. It continues to increase, and we really need to get our arms around it. Next chart, please. Here's what you probably don't know, and here's an area where we've underutilized, I think, the United States Air Force and some of our joint partners. Inside of this organization, we have 4,000 software professionals. You can see where they're located, but probably what you don't know is if you look at the bottom there, some of the leading edge programs that they've participated in. In fact, you've probably heard a fair amount about DIUX's tanker scheduling tool. Some of the coding was done from Air Force Sustainment Center airmen in California who went to California. That's interesting. And I bet when you think Air Force Sustainment Center airmen, you think of blue suiters. They're all civilian. We have 3 software houses. You can see how they're laid out across the planet. Some are even CMMI level 5. So they're very capable, incredible teams of software professionals. Next chart. You'll have this in your deck for you to look at. It just lays out generally who does what where. But if you look at the amount of real estate that they're using, it's a pretty significant investment on the nation, on behalf of the nation, to take care of software for weapon systems. Next chart. But as I mentioned, it's more about the ecosystem and less about the weapon system, and I don't think we had that quite right. Because what we don't have is a funding stream that goes across multiple years and blends multiple colors of money into one stream of money. Because if you want to take care of the mission planning or the health diagnostic systems or their training systems, it needs to be fiscal year agnostic. And right now, that's not how the department budgets. It's also not how it buys its human beings from a talent acquisition perspective, because most of this work is funded by the working capital fund. So I run a $16 billion a year P&L, and sometimes that drives the wrong behaviors for the department. Next chart. It's also cheaper and more cost effective for the department because it costs less than industry. That's not necessarily good or bad in all cases. It's about effectiveness, not always about efficiency. But sometimes in this marketplace, you want some competition, and you might even want some cooperation. Because in areas, particularly for DoD systems, where you have only one vendor in the marketplace, sometimes it drives a financial unaffordability equation to the DoD. So I'm going to get the hook here in a minute, but I wanted to tease this out just a little bit with you to show you that there is a large organic capability that lives in the department. They are U.S. Air Force airmen, but they wear that to work. They don't wear this to work. And they have tremendous capability. If we changed how we hired, if we changed how we funded, and if we managed the requirement stream so that it wasn't married up with the traditional hardware acquisition model and realized that software has a life cycle that's iterative and not waterfall, then I think we would be much better, and we could harness this capability and some similar capabilities in other branches of the service to support not only the weapon system, but the ecosystem that will be essential for war winning in the second half of the 21st century. So thanks for letting me spend a few minutes with you, and I've really enjoyed that opportunity, and thanks to the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
One of the things that's really, I think, helped this board have an impact is the stand-up of a group of generals and admirals chosen by the chiefs of each service to act as a liaison between the board members and the services. And this has really been incredibly helpful to the board in gaining information and traction and having that two-way conduit information. We're very lucky that today we have one of those members of our Senior Leader Innovation Council here today to talk about his work in the Navy. Please welcome Admiral Hahn.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Let's try it. There it is. Good afternoon. A couple quick things. I currently serve as the Chief of Naval Research. So what that means is I am blessed with the ability to work in the part of the Navy and Marine Corps organization that is challenged to do the following thing. This is our mission statement. Plan, foster, and encourage scientific research for future naval power because of its paramount importance for national security. Those words were written in 1946 by the Congress, and that's what chartered my organization. And the same experience in World War II that Eric referred to in his opening remarks caused this secret sauce of academic research, defense industrial and other industrial, and the uniformed military to come together in this wonderful relationship that has worked very, very well for a number of decades. As we enter into this part of our history, it is clear to the Navy and Marine Corps leadership that that formula, although still good, is not delivering the outcomes that we're after. And there's a piece of the innovation ecosystem that exists in our country that's not yet been fully adopted by the Department of Defense establishment. And so we're trying to nug through why that is. I want to share a couple thoughts with you today on things that are going on inside the Navy and Marine Corps that are trying to get at it in a way that we get to the right outcomes for the taxpayer investment into the research and development stream, and more importantly, to the outcome we're all after in my business, which is capability at scale in the hands of the warfighter, and that comes in my service, and put it on a ship, cockpit of a plane, in a submarine, or in the hands of a Marine. If we can't do that, then all of this is just activity, right? So our Chief of Naval Operations and our Secretary of the Navy recognize this, along with the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And there's a couple different forms of innovation and activity that occur that need to get squared away. They recognize that the pieces of the puzzle are in place, but the behaviors that surround them are not exactly right. So I echo General Levy's remarks that all the pieces are there, but we're not using them necessarily in the optimal way. So this group, the leadership of the Navy, stood up an accelerated acquisition set of initiatives. And fundamentally what this does is force the system to work at its theoretical limit. And the theoretical limit that CNO challenges us with in the selected projects that we work through, it's not about cost and it's not about performance. Those are givens. It's about schedule. So whenever one of these projects enters into the mix, the only question that the boss asks is, what is the theoretical limit to get that in the field? And then we dive into that a little bit because he's never satisfied that the first answer is the best one, nor is it the right one. And so he has challenged the system to work through the funding issues, the contractual issues, the logistics issues, the how do I manage cost, schedule, performance, and what do I do with my matrix organization that's doing a lot of different things, be it a software product or a hardware product or modifying a missile system by putting a different seeker on the front end. Doesn't matter. And that's proved over the course of the last year to, I would say, my assessment is to tilt the system, because now all the excuses get removed about why I can't. And the system has responded wonderfully. So on the selected projects that we are working on, which include big things like an unmanned tanker, the MQ-25, some directed energy weapons that are going to be integrated onto an Aegis-capable ship, those are all moving at a pace that the acquisition part of our system does not recognize as possible. So that's good news. The land of software and how that gets developed and moved along, I don't think we've explored that deeply enough to try to get at it, but I will tell you that there are some highlights or some areas of goodness where those practices that you all certainly promote and that we all recognize are necessary to make this work inside of the DoD ecosystem, those are already in evidence and have been for a couple decades. And I point specifically to the submarine program and the watershed moment that occurred inside of that community when the Seawolf funding went away, when that program got truncated at 3 submarines, and what that caused that group to have to do to think about how do we put combat systems on submarines in a world of things that aren't government-created hardware and software that runs on it. So that watershed moment, it was existential to the submarine force, caused a suspension of the culture that existed at the time, and forced us into a different model. And it is the model that is a continuum of software development, requirements definition, stable funding across all the colors of money that are necessary inside the DoD to make this successful, and the user interaction across that whole virtuous cycle that makes it good. I had the opportunity to work inside of that set of programs as a program manager. And I can't tell you how energized that team is every single day, because the contracting professionals see the result of their work in their lifetime in government service, as do the program folks, the folks who are our industry partners, and the performer base recognizes that if I miss this one opportunity, I'll get the next one. And so it's this wonderful group of folks that as a community are achieving the outcome that I think you're trying to drive at. And I point to that as sort of a shining example, on the hill. So thank you for the opportunity to at least highlight that one. Also, thank you for the opportunity to interact with the board as we move through this. I recognize the software is one stop on the journey, and there will be many more that occur as we move through time to get DoD up on step with the world, where the world's going. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. And we will now hear from George Duchek. George is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Communications, Command, Control, and Cyber, which means he's the key official in the Pentagon responsible for acquisition and sustainment of these kinds of weapon systems, and has a varied background in many areas of technology, and will share his perspective on the problem.
I'm going to stand behind the podium. I'm not as extemporaneous as my predecessors. And allergy season just found me this morning, so I apologize if I start coughing or if I go hoarse a bit. But I want to thank the board here for taking on this challenge. Software, in my opinion, is foundational to everything that we do. We can't be an agile military. We can't operate at the speed of need without reforming the way we do software acquisition. A little bit about myself. I've been in this current job for not quite 2 years. and it's my first job on the acquisition side. I had previously worked mostly on the R&D side. I wish I knew a lot more about acquisition when I was on the R&D side, because I see these two parts as being somewhat decoupled. But my portfolio, as Josh said, is command and control, communications, cyber, and business systems, all software-intensive programs. So I'm going to talk a little philosophically about what we at C3CB do and how we're trying to make a dent in the software universe, the DoD software universe. And I want to talk about three things. One is mental models, two is talent, and three is incentives. So how many folks have ever tried to train an elephant? No, I see one person. So what I'm told, I've never done it either, but I'm told that when the elephant is very young, baby elephants, you take something like a clothesline and pound a stake into the ground and give them some clothesline, tie their foot to it. And the baby elephant habituates to knowing that he could only go so far. Well, the elephant gets bigger, stronger, and angrier, but he still remembers in his mind that that string on his ankle only lets him go so far from the ground. So he's been habituated to thinking that that's the way he's supposed to behave. So DoD has been largely successful over the past 100 years, and really over the past 50 years, with a production mentality, with a mental model that's focused on production. We obey the supply side economies of scale, I say 2 minutes, in production. It's all about learning curve, coming down the cost curve. And so production really matters in getting the requirements right, because you can't go and retool a production line without a lot of cost and time and effort. So we're no longer in the industrial age, we're in the information age. Those rules of supply side economies of scale don't prevail, but demand side economies of scale prevail. The unit cost, after I've invested in building a piece of software, the unit cost for the second piece is really zero. But we have this mental model, just like that elephant stuck to that string in the department, that we could only do things within the acquisition system that focus on production. So we have to change that mental model in the department to think more about going from development to sustainment in software rather than going through production. So I saw the sign up from minutes ago. So it's going to take a cultural change, and I applaud the board for putting out the 10 software commandments. I think that will be foundational for a new strategy in software. But strategy doesn't work unless the culture supports the strategy. And we need to change the culture in DoD in order to make the strategy effective. I was meeting with Pivotal and Pivotal Labs, and everybody knows that they do a lot of software training. And I asked Jeff Howard what the biggest impediment was for adoption of new software development techniques by companies that they work with. And he said culture was the #1 reason. You go into an organization that's used to doing things a particular way, trying to get them to change the way they do business is completely antithetical and makes it difficult for the organization to change. So new models, new mental models are going to drive new cultures, and those new cultures are going to drive new software strategies. So next is talent. Do you realize in the Department of Defense, you do not have a civilian classification code? Despite what you said about 4,000 civilians, I'll guarantee you none of them are classified as a software engineer. You do not have a civilian classification code for data scientist. You do not have a civilian classification code for data engineer. I can't think of 3 jobs more fundamental to an information economy, and yet the government cannot get those people in the front door because we're reluctant to change the civilian classification codes to meet those emerging needs. So you have to get the right people on the bus, and that competing for talent is not only competing within DoD, but also the same folks that private industry is competing against. And that talent is also needed by our other DIB, the Defense Industrial Base. They are very acclimated to doing business the way they've always done it. They know the ecosystem, they know how it works. Getting that to change is going to be a Herculean task. And that's where the third thing I want to talk about, incentives, comes in. We need to construct incentives that align the right behaviors of our workforce, of the government, and of our industry partners to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for, which means faster time to market, more affordable software, and more secure software. SEI, I saw some folks in the audience, did a report not long ago that said 90% of software vulnerabilities, cyber vulnerabilities are introduced by poor software design. So if we get the software right, we're getting cybersecurity right. They're symbiotic. So my office is passionate about getting software right. I'm glad to be working with the DIB. I want you to think of me as a resource that you can use to help advance your cause. We've got to change the mental models. We have to develop and train talent, and we have to construct the right incentives. So thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, George. I now have the privilege of introducing those of you in Boston and Cambridge to one of your own, Mike McKinley, who runs DIUX Boston. Mike is an Air Force colonel, and I just want to say, because he may not say this, but I will, we need all the help we can get. And there are brilliant, brilliant people in these institutions of academia and startups here. And if you are interested in being part of what the department is doing, you have an ambassador from the department on your doorstep. And so if you are excited about what you hear in this meeting, you should find Mike afterwards, and he can be a conduit for you into the department.
I will, for local context, finding Mike either after the meeting or finding Mike involves, it's just a 6-block walk in the direction of the Galleria, so you all know where it is.
Absolutely, and thank you both. So Mike McKinley, run the Boston office of the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. Our task at DIUX is to find the latest in commercial technology and bring that into the Department of Defense. And that's a fun and exciting job to do, and it's also incredibly important. And so what I'd like to do, I know I just have a few minutes today, we're not going to talk about contracts or get into the details, but I think the cultural aspect cannot be overstated. We talked about, for everyone who's spoken already, just the importance of getting the right talent. How do we do that? And so 3 things that I want to run past. One is for folks in this space, and how do we do this within the DoD? It's first, get scrappy. We have to get scrappy. Second is get connected. And the third is get inspired. And some of these concepts were pushed home to me or beaten over my head even recently by people I respect deeply who have suggested that even following these, we need to be even more bold, given the importance of what we are trying to accomplish. So first, what is get scrappy? I think it's important anyone who is in this space, when you think about how do I bring in other folks to this space, it's creating this sense of a little bit of tension, a little bit, if I don't do my job, something will happen. In the private sector, you have that, okay? We feel that on a macro level from the Department of Defense, but how do we bring that and make that personal? So every day when we come to work, it is make or break. As in, if I don't do my job today, the door may close, right? And at the macro level, clearly it's a national security issue. If we don't do our jobs collectively, we got bigger problems. But it starts at the micro level. How do we do that? My recommendation is creating a culture that's made of scrappy people. Find those people, recruit them, and bring them in. Number 2, get connected. All right, so this is fantastic, right? This is a chance to convene and to bring in a broad community here. And like Josh and Dr. Lander mentioned, this is it. We are here. We are located in Cambridge. We want to interact with you. We will only be successful if we engage you. Right? That is the entire point and purpose of the Department Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. The key, and actually there's an interesting, I think it's interesting, a technique we've used so far to engage with the local universities at Harvard and MIT and Tufts. We somewhat jokingly call it the Cambridge Mafia. If you're familiar with Air Force Colonel John Boyd, had the Fighter Mafia several decades ago. It's a group of people who are not afraid to challenge conventional thinking. And what better group than officers who are sent by their services to some of the leading academic institutions to then come to DIUX and work with us to try to figure out how do we continue to challenge and defy conventions to move the country forward. And the third point here is get inspired. If nothing else, this is an incredibly dynamic place to be. But we in the DoD are not going to attract the talent that we need if we are not inspiring people. Right? You know that in the private sector. If you want the best talent, they need to come work with you. They need to want to work with you. And we have an incredible opportunity. The problem set that the Department of Defense gets to work on is like no other. I think people get that. I mean, clearly what I've seen interacting with the folks in this area, people value that very highly. So we need to go out there and get them inspired, get them fired up. And Captain Kroger is going to come following, and I think he's going to explain a lot of young, motivated officers enlisted who are doing that. But we need more of this. We need more Captain Krogers in the Air Force and the military in general. So again, thank you for your time and your guidance. We need more of your leadership, and my ask is that, again, continue to be vocal supporters of what we are trying to do, because it absolutely matters. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mike. 2 years ago, when the board was first convening and first doing what we call battlefield circulation, going from location to location, interviewing people at all levels, they came back with a central understanding that information and data was going to be critical to all future warfighting. The Marine Corps understood this and did something unprecedented, which the board welcomed, and they created an Assistant Commandant for Information, a new position in a massive reorganization. Obviously, the Assistant Commandant for Information needs access to technology and needs strategy around technology and needed a great Chief Technology Officer. He asked Jennifer to be that person. So we invited Jennifer to tell us what the Marine Corps is doing to try to tackle this problem.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to come talk about what the Marine Corps is doing in this space. So I'd like to start with a rhetorical question and ask everybody to think about a Marine. You've probably pictured a tough, honorable warrior, probably something that you've seen in some of the commercials. You've probably pictured a warrior who will adapt and overcome any obstacle to accomplish a mission. Now I'd like you to picture the information domain. And you're probably picturing a domain that is expanding at a rate that we can't even begin to comprehend. Through disruption, through innovation, it is a new frontier. And so the Marine Corps decided to form the Deputy Commandant to focus on that particular domain. And our challenge was, how do we get Marines who are fierce, tough warriors who will adapt and overcome any situation to operate in this new domain? How do we articulate the problems that they could face, and how do we get after solving them? And while we started a number of different efforts across infrastructure and platform and different rapid capability development areas, I'll focus my remarks today on software. Our solution to identifying and solving software problems, we lifted a page right out of the Silicon Valley playbook, and we started an accelerator. So just like a tech startup accelerator, we have Marines form cohorts. Cohorts of active duty personnel, members of all ranks, and team them with designers, developers, engineers, system administrators, and mentors to identify and solve a problem in 12 weeks. So following a design, develop, and deploy cycle, Marines focus quickly on honing into a problem and a solution. We move beyond the traditional acquisition boundaries, and hopefully we're informing new changes to that as well. But our goal is to identify and solve a problem quickly. We begin that experience by thinking differently about our problems, and to think differently, we must be different. So we create a rankless environment. We ask Marines to come in their favorite t-shirt and jeans, and for those of you who know Marines, that's actually a very big deal. And it creates this level set experience. And then we get to work. We get to work by teaching and implementing lean startup principles, design thinking tools, and service design practices. We zero in on a problem, not just the superficial problems that we tend to talk about in big government meetings of things are deficient, world hunger level problems. No, we challenge Marines to break that down, arm them with tools, and say it simply in ways that your mom can understand. Then we get them to identify the target customer segment and start to validate that problem solution fit. We ask them to get out of the building, crowdsource with their peers, go back to their home organizations, and really solicit feedback. We arm them with wireframing. And I'll tell you, Marines can prepare wireframes that would rival any Pixar animator. And then we get to building the MVP. So ultimately, we develop a minimally viable product that will validate our problem solution fit, deploy that, and continue to iterate. At the end of our 12-week cycle, Marines pitch general officers for a release decision. It is truly a captivating sight to see Marines empowered, Marines who have solved their problem, and Marines pitching these solutions for release. The ownership is impressive. To date, we've formed 9 accelerator cohorts and produced 10 MVPs, and each has followed a specific transition path. While this is a nice metric of success, what is equally compelling is the feedback from our Marines. 100% of attendees have found it to be a value-added experience, and 100% of attendees would recommend it to a friend. Again, high praise for Marines. And there are countless individual stories. Individual Marines who have actually taken these principles and started to apply them themselves locally. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a Master Gunnery Sergeant who said, "Jen, you've ruined me. I can no longer accept the status quo. I have to actively look to solve these problems." So our challenge now is one of scale. While we have many different efforts going on, for our accelerator process, we're looking to scale. We've had great success in the software realm. We are looking at how we can scale this to other domains and other functions. So I thank you for the opportunity to share our story, and I look forward to feedback from the DIB about how we can march forward on our scaling journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Jen. For our last speaker, we will hear from Captain Brian Kroger. The board said to me, Executive Director, find me the disruptors. Where are the troublemakers? Who actually programs? And it took us about a year, but we found them. So I introduced to you the person who is the Chief Operations Officer of Kessel Run, which is an extraordinary program in the Air Force where airmen are doing Agile software development and shipping products to the field every single day.
Thank you. So as he said, I'm Captain Brian Kroger, Chief Operations Officer for Project Kessel Run. This initiative out of Air Force Lifecycle Management Center was started in partnership with Defense Innovation Unit Experimental. And we're trying to revolutionize the way that the Air Force builds and delivers software. And our initial goal is really focused on modernizing the Air Operations Center itself and the targeting and GEOINT capabilities within it. But I want to talk about the bigger picture today, and that's that software, if it's eating the world, it's certainly eating the war. And just like long, stable industries are being disrupted, whether you're in banking or insurance, newcomers that can wield software effectively are able to disrupt. And the last place that we want to be disrupted is on the battlefield. You talk about a reason for getting scrappy, I can't think of a better one. And in terms of being motivated and inspired, our airmen definitely feel that in a very real way. The last place, again, that we want to be disrupted is on the battlefield. So our team, in partnership with DIUX, started out on this effort. We've recently fully transitioned this over to Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, and we're starting to scale. So I want to talk about, really briefly, some of the successes we've had to date. We were able to award the contract with DIUX in 60 days, so I'm not going to talk a lot about the acquisitions piece today. That's a beast, but that's almost unheard of. And then from there, we deployed our unclassified commercial cloud platform in 60 days, and then 2 classified production environments, commercial cloud infrastructure and platform in 130 days. We've taken now 5 applications from ideation on a whiteboard into production, live on SIPR being used by warfighters in an average of 124 days, which previously just getting authority to operate and get put on the network takes over a year. So that in and of itself is incredible. We're the first DoD organization to establish true continuous delivery on SIPRnet, which means we can push to SIPR on demand, meeting all of the regulations, all of the documentation requirements that we need to push live onto SIPR operations. That's phase 1. That was focused primarily on Air Force's Central Command. I know the board actually visited out there and was kind of the impetus behind the first product choice, which was Tanker Planner Tool. Now we're scaling out in phase 2 to the rest of the enterprise. By the end of the year, we're going to have an 8-region commercial cloud platform layout, and we have had to tackle a lot of areas, JSIDs, the requirements process, planning, programming, budgeting, execution. We're tackling all of it, not just the software development, and then the defense acquisition system itself. There's a lot of other supporting contracts besides just the OTA that we've done with Pivotal through DIUX. But today I want to talk about why I believe we've been successful. To quote one of our Navy brethren, Admiral Richardson, he said, "It's about the team that can bring the people, the process, and the technology together to learn the fastest. That's the team that has the advantage." I want to emphasize that last part is the most important part about learning the fastest. Not necessarily, we're always setting out to get the people, the technology, and the process. But being able to learn is key so that we're not going out and trying to acquire buzzwords. Rather, focus on the capability to learn and acquiring that so that we're always able to stay at the forefront of the latest technology, the latest culture. And that's key. Learning fast requires fast feedback loops. And the key to that in the software world is continuous delivery. Some of the biggest reasons the department struggles with continuous delivery, to paraphrase Jez Humble, and I agree, is that we have a culture problem and an architecture problem. On the architecture side, I want to say that in the DoD space right now, it should just be a no-brainer that commercial infrastructure and platform as a service is a prerequisite for software delivery outcomes. We shouldn't even be worried about that. And I would say commercial, because we shouldn't be building things that we can buy and we shouldn't be buying things that we can rent. Commercial industry has solved a lot of these problems for us already. Getting that commercial cloud infrastructure in place allows us, our airmen who are developing out at Kessel Run, to focus on the apps and the data. And that's key. But it's also about using the right practices and processes. So we learned in partnership with Pivotal Labs that it's not just about the Agile software development. It's also about a whole balanced team of lean product management, user-centered design, some of the things you just talked about. As well as employing Agile. We do XP, where we pair our airmen with expert software developers from the commercial industry, side by side, one-on-one, in their spaces, learning their culture. And that's been key. But I want to close on a focus on those airmen and the culture that enables them. If we could walk out of here agreeing on one thing, especially in our Air Force and across the services, there's no talent shortage. There's just a shortage of environments where airmen with a growth mindset can thrive, can learn, and feel safe to do so. And so this echoes the sentiment that the board gave that we don't have an innovation problem, just an innovation adoption problem. And also your comments, sir, Mr. Schmidt, that we need psychological safety. So I want to talk a little bit about that. Our success, I think, has really come from giving that environment along with the right resources, training, and tools, and then getting out of the airmen's way. Like, our airmen rise to the occasion. I'm blown away that, despite not being on par technically, if I'm being honest, with their commercial counterparts, that growth mindset, they make up for it, coming into this environment, learning from commercial industry, and by the time they leave, they are on par with their commercial counterparts. But they won't. Just if you get out of the way, it doesn't mean you're going to get the outcomes you want unless you establish that psychological safety. And it's not lost on me that I'm standing here in a military uniform talking about psychological safety. And in fact, in some rooms, I might get laughed at for saying that. But honestly, the one element of culture, if you look at what makes teams successful in the software delivery performance, almost all of them line up with military culture around discipline and organization, mission, and feeling like they have a sense of purpose. But the one where I think we really lack and we could do better is psychological safety. And I'd say the thing that's been really fascinating to me is to see how when you create this environment and you get rid of the ranks and you make a flat organizational structure, that our airmen are much more willing to give open and honest feedback, to feel safe to fail. Because let's be honest, like in the software world, it's all about continuous delivery. The reason you're trying to continuously deliver is because you want to learn, and you're learning from mistakes that you make. And so being able to freely make those mistakes and creating an environment where the airmen feel safe to do so has been absolutely essential. So we just opened, we did a soft opening of our facility. We're moving out of Pivotal Labs now into our own facility at WeWork, and in 2 weeks from now, we'll be doing the hard launch. We have about 90 seats. We've taken 70 airmen through this process so far to become software developers, software designers, product managers, and we're going to continue to expand that up to 300. And so if the Air Force and the department really wants to invest, I would say create environments where airmen with a growth mindset can learn and thrive. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. So I think we'll now transition to the portion of our session where we're going to present our software work and deliberate on it. And I think we'll get started with a presentation from Bess, or do you want to go to Michael and Richard first to tee things up?
You're first.
Bess, the floor is yours.
All right, good afternoon. My name is Beth Stopkine, and I'm on a year-long detail from the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation to the Defense Innovation Board to manage this congressionally mandated software study. During last year's April public meeting, I spoke about the work the cost community was doing to improve the department's acquisition program data. Today, I'm here to introduce the public to what the Defense Innovation Board plans to do with acquisition data this year. To begin, here's what Congress has tasked us to do. Where did I just put that? There we go. The 2018 National Defense Authorization Act directed this board to undertake a study on streamlining software development and acquisition regulations. Specifically, review acquisition processes and organizational structures to improve software acquisition to maintain the defense technological advantage, identify department case studies of best and worst practices, produce specific recommendations for legislative and non-legislative reforms, offer any additional recommendations for legislation as the board believes are appropriate. The underlying frustration is that DoD struggles to acquire software successfully. And both Congress and the DoD believe that the other is preventing better, more streamlined, more successful, more capable, more cost-effective, more timely software. Obviously, there's probably some truth to both perspectives, and we are setting out to answer what laws, regulations, and practices should be changed to allow the department to shrink its software acquisition cycle and push better capability to the warfighters faster. To answer the direction in the law, we aim to provide the department and Congress with suggested statutory changes, suggested regulatory changes, and suggestions for new language to modernize and streamline the department's software acquisition processes, identification of organizational and cultural practices that hold the department back, and the final recommendation this board would like to provide is the identification of the appropriate type of data to collect for effective decision-making and oversight of software acquisition. This one is particularly dear to me, as many of us have argued for years for better and more strategic enterprise-wide data collection and use in the department. Many of us are skeptical that a large amount of good software data even exists in the department, let alone in any easily accessible way, meaning not collected via a massive hand-created data call. Much of the data we'd like to have for this analysis was never strategically planned for or collected, but we'll get to that in a second. Here's how we set out to tackle this effort. First, user interviews. In true Agile form, let's find out the real issues from the users. Do they ask for a capability, but help only comes after many years of waiting? Do they even get what they asked for when the software arrives? If they're program managers, what's painful about the software acquisition system we have today? Where do they really struggle? And for the decision makers in the service, acquisition offices, and in OSD, are they even able to tell whether the software programs they're running are healthy and rolling along, in dire need of help, or somewhere in between? Second, case studies of best and worst practices in the department are a great way to highlight in color how the acquisition system works today. And the board will use these case studies to help improve and hone their recommendations and test their hypotheses of the 10 commandments of software. Third, obviously there have been many related efforts and reports written, like the Defense Science Board's recent study and the Section 809 panel's recommendations. We are actively engaging with the authors and analysts and are making sure to review what is already out there so we can stand on their shoulders, champion their suggestions, and hopefully recommend actionable changes. Fourth is advanced data analysis, and we break this into two categories. The first, and I will let Richard, Michael, and Milo tell you more about this effort, as this is the one they are most excited about, is to use the advanced analytics and machine learning on department data. They're interested in doing an analysis of DoD software projects and creating a tool that will execute data analytics to provide new insights into our software acquisition processes. They're looking for a better understanding of software acquisition features that can be cross-correlated with cost and schedule overruns, performance issues, upgrade cycles and costs, and other metrics relating to the ability of the DoD to acquire and update different categories of software rapidly. The board wants to find people who specialize in this technology in the commercial sector and show the department that cutting-edge analytical prototypes like this are actually possible. The second analytics effort is using natural language processing tools and analysis to help us sift through piles of interrelated laws, regulations, guidance, and manuals that affect how the current software acquisition system works today. This analysis will help us understand the second-order effects of asking Congress and the department for targeted changes to specific laws and regulations. Fifth, also in the 2018 NDAA, right after tasking this study, the law directed the department to go out and perform some real-life Agile or iterative software development pilots. As the CAPE director told me, you can do a big study, but nothing's better than actually trying it out and seeing where all the red tape lies. We will champion these efforts in the department this year, and will incorporate their lessons learned into the study's analysis and recommendations. Our interim report is due to Congress in early May, and our final report is due on April 5th, 2019. The board members have spent the past 2 years meeting with people located across the department and around the world. They've seen and discussed many software issues, and they've developed from these conversations their 10 commandments of software, which is next up on the agenda. The board is using the 10 commandments as the study's initial hypotheses, which we will test with the data analysis, interviews, case studies, and pilots. In May, we will submit the 10 commandments and the study plan to Congress as our initial report. Now let's talk about the data effort a little bit more, specifically some of the issues that come along with it. First, there's the Trade Secrets Act, which our lawyers take very seriously, and violation of it is pretty much the only thing you can go to jail for in acquisition. We guard industry's proprietary data very carefully, and the only people who see and handle this data must be government employees, and perhaps not Silicon Valley companies at the forefront of machine learning. Individual non-disclosure agreements directly between the analytics company and the DoD weapons contractors could be established, but there are more than 300 weapons contractors with data in our main databases, and any outside developer would have to sign NDAs with every one of the 300 plus contractors to access the database. So getting the investigators access to the data would take only the whole year, if not longer. We're continuing to work through this issue, and we're trying to get some great government analysts with these skills to help start the analysis. Second, everyone knows contracting in the government is painful, as we've heard. Working to let small, agile contracts to a few capable entities for quick, short-term, iterative spins isn't something our contracting process does easily. It seems appropriate that we're hitting the same issues the acquisition community confronts when contracting for small, agile, iterative software efforts. And then here's the big problem, and exactly 1 year ago, I was presenting at this spring public board meeting in DC, and I started by saying that there is an assumption the department has tons of data, and we just need help with software to analyze it. I can only speak to acquisition, but I have a reality check, and we have a problem. Our leadership relies on experience and trusted advisors because timely authoritative data is not readily available for real analysis. We do not have the amazing amounts of data you'd assume we'd have. We've never strategically collected it. Everybody fights the collection and sharing of data. Our organizations compete for authority, leadership's trust, and resources. Data owners are incentivized to limit access and share only when directed. The only way to collect and access data is through personal relationships or data calls, not because there's any agreement that it's good for the department. And there is no strategic data planning. And we have no real acquisition data system that holds anything more than top-level rolled-up data on our largest programs. Today, our best analyses take months to create, to find data, to collect them, to compile them from siloed and restricted systems. And up until a few years ago, we still collected that data by hand, and we still do in many cases. We'll never benefit from awesome data analytics until the culture changes. And we have this tremendous opportunity. Of course, if we can get past cultural and structural impediments, we can do analyses on which software acquisition strategies are best, harnessing the power of more efficient industry practices. We can better negotiate contracts and predict the cost and schedule of systems. We can make better decisions quicker. So now here's our opportunity in regards to data. Congress wrote law directing this board to study this important issue. The Secretary of Defense tasked Honorable Lord, the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition Sustainment, to direct the Defense Innovation Board and act upon the DIB's advice and recommendations as appropriate. Ms. Lord is fully invested in this study and is so committed to improvements that just last week she brought on a special assistant for software acquisition. The director of CAPE, who provides the Secretary, A&S, Research and Engineering, and the services with independent analyses for decision-making, has detailed me to the board for the year to manage the study. Ms. Lord is convening the department leadership early next week to stress her interest and excitement for this effort and to champion the sharing of data. The leadership of the department realizes that software acquisition is a crucial, thorny, and interesting problem the department needs to solve. Perhaps this is the moment the department comes together to say, having data to analyze is important, sharing data is important, and here are the data metrics for software that we are now committed to collecting across the enterprise. We're looking forward to an exciting year.
Phenomenal. Michael, Richard, tell us more.
All right. Thank you, Bess. Before I begin, I'll simply say, if nothing else, when I hear Bess say that the CAPE director, quote, says, what could be better than trying something? I actually have hope, so thank you very much. Okay, Eric said we were going to be interactive, so I'm going to actually start with an interactive activity for all of you. So for all of you in the audience who do software, could you raise your hand? Okay, so I want you to keep your hand up in the air until I say something that is not the way you do software. Okay, has everybody got the rule? When I say something you don't do, you put your hand down. So this is the way we do things in the department. The first thing we do is we think about the problem. Okay, nobody put their hand down. The second thing we do is we spend enormous amount of time getting the requirements right.
Two hands remaining.
The third thing we do is we agree on the requirements.
That's about it.
So, for those of you that are on the live stream, I will stipulate there are no hands in the air.
One.
One? Is there still one? Okay. After we get the requirements right, we spend a lot of time writing a contract that exquisitely details how those contract requirements will be met. So got it? Okay, okay.
He's obviously
No fair, he worked for Raytheon.
Thank you. Okay. Then we spend an exquisite amount of time deciding should we sign the contract.
He's still with us.
Right, we're still there. All right, then we develop software, whatever that, develop something. Let's pretend this is not a software conversation. Then when we're all done developing, we test. We still got you? Okay. Then we bring somebody else in to say if our tests were right or not. Okay. Thank you. I only had two more things, so that's good. Exactly. Okay, then we declare we are done. Then we pay a lot of money to sustain, where sustain generally means two things. It means fix, and it means take care of things that go out of service. Okay, so if I stop there, you all know the punchline. This is not the way we should be acquiring software. So to set context for everybody here and the commandments that we're going to talk about, it is simply the case that software is not hardware. And the way we buy, acquire, sustain, and maintain software cannot be functionally done the way we do hardware. I'll talk about different kinds of software in just a moment, just to make sure you all realize that we're not sort of painting with too broad of a brush. But the fact is, it's not just that the economic models about software are different than the economic models for hardware. It is simply the case that in a properly done world, the concept of software being done is the wrong concept. Not done because we didn't get it right, but because the best way to do software is to incrementally improve the software as you go. It'll speak to issues that we all know about in this room, issues about color of money, issues about sustainment costs, but the mentality that says you start with software, you get something done that is minimally acceptable to move a program forward, and you continue to iterate is the way we need to be doing software. And that is not the way the acquisition system permits, allows, enables, or encourages us to do software. So that's the ground rule. It is different than hardware, and the way software is done in the department now, quite honestly, is simply not the way software is done in the private sector any longer. So with that, do we have the slide up?
Yep, we got types.
Okay. I do want to make sure people understand we're not completely sort of oblivious. There are different kinds of software, and the idea that we will provide a set of rules in how modern software should be done, and those rules will be right for everybody, and right for every kind of software, is also simply not the right case. So the four different kinds of software that our taxonomy has derived or come down to is first, commercial off-the-shelf software, where what the DoD needs to do or a service needs to do is the same as what somebody in the private sector does. Our encouragement there is simply go buy it. This is not software that should be touched in any way. So that's one category of software. The second category of software is commercial software that does require some customization. Some customization because of an unique feature that the department puts in, whether that's a cybersecurity feature, although have not yet found a department cybersecurity issue that's not reflected somewhere in the proper private sector, but some form of customization that's required. The third kind of software that we have in our taxonomy is software that is custom software. It is unique to a DoD mission of one kind or another, but that software runs on commodity hardware. Commodity hardware that can exist in a cloud, commodity hardware that can exist in a service data center of some kind, or commodity hardware that can exist in the field. So category 3, software that is custom to the department, needs to be created for the department, but can run on commercial hardware. And the fourth category is the hardest category to think about in terms of how processes need to be structured. Custom software that runs on custom hardware. And there, lots of thought is required. The software that is at the deepest level in the embedded code for a radar system, or the deepest level of the avionics that make sure that an aircraft stays in the air, or that the energy systems on a weapon system operate correctly, is not the same as a user interface for an app that runs on a commercial piece of hardware. And so as we go through the thought processes we have around the commandments for software, keep in mind that we are cognizant of the fact that these have to be applied properly for the different kinds of software that are in place. With that, let me turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Richard Murray, who's going to take you through our thinking on the 10 Commandments for software.
Great, thanks, Michael. So first let me say that this is, as Michael said, a set of hypotheses about what we think those kind of commandments on software ought to be. It's our put at what we think the Department of Defense ought to be thinking about. I urge you all, if you're interested in this, to go grab the actual document off the DIB website that has a little bit more detail. You'll see that it's labeled version 0.14, and so we're still in beta here on this, and we're looking for feedback today from the board on some of the things that this small team has kind of put together as a starting point, as a set of hypotheses, but also over time from the broader group of people in the military and commercial businesses and everybody about whether these are the right types of things and what are we missing and other things. So today, after I'm done, I'll go through what the 10 Commandments are and briefly summarize them for you. And then ask for feedback from the board members as we deliberate on what we've put together. I would also say, and Michael said this, I'm going to give these to you, and I'm not going to, sort of be explicit about which types of software they apply to. But again, in the document, I hope you'll take a look. We've tried to articulate. We think that these commandments are most applicable to this categories of software. And again, one size doesn't fit all in software either. Certainly, one size doesn't fit all across sort of all procurement programs and acquisition programs. Definitely not in the case of software either. Okay, so with that, let me just walk through what those 10 commandments are. So the first commandment is to make computing storage and bandwidth abundant to DoD developers and users. We need to move from a situation of information technology poverty, which we see all the time in the Department of Defense, to one of information technology abundance if we're really going to take advantage of the power of modern software. We can't be in a situation where the amount of computing that I provide to a graduate student is 10x the amount of computing that somebody in the DoD has, right? And that is 1,000 factor less than what somebody at a major IT company should be. That just can't be the right answer. So we have to move to abundance in compute, in storage, and in bandwidth across the DoD. So that's the first commandment. Second commandment. Software procurement programs should start small, be iterative, and build on success, or be terminated quickly. It doesn't make sense to have, if you sort of set up a hundreds of millions of dollar software project, you trigger all sorts of processes and bureaucracy that are significantly increasing the amount of time it takes you to develop that software, as well as the cost of that software, as well as the likelihood that that software ever actually does anything. Rather than doing that, do what we've already heard multiple times. Let's get something working quickly. Let's try it out. Let's iterate on those software designs and continuously develop that capability. And so we think that we need to start small, be iterative, and build on those successes. Commandment number 3. Budgets need to be constructed to support the full life cycle cost of software, with the amount of that budget proportional to the criticality and utility of that software. Again, we've already heard this from some of our speakers. Software does not age well. It requires continuous development and deployment. Software is never done. And if we don't budget for it, we're going to get ourselves stuck, right? Because we're going to say, okay, great, we've done the sort of 7 steps that Michael talked about a little bit and that you heard from others. And then now we're in the sustainment stage. Well, how do we add a new feature? Oh, I'm sorry, we got to go back to stage 1. We got to do all of those steps all over again, right? So 5 years from now, we can have that new feature. Not the way software should be done. So we need to recognize that the way budgets are constructed to support software needs to be different than it is in hardware, and it doesn't make sense to split things into RDT&E, the research, development, test, and evaluation, separate from procurement, separate from operations and maintenance. In software, right, that's a continuous process that's continually iterating, and so we need to budget it that way. Commandment number 4, adopt a DevOps culture for software systems. You've already, again, heard this. Agile and DevOps are part of the way that modern software gets done. It's part of what allows Silicon Valley, and that really means sort of modern software, to move so fast. This includes things like the use of open source, modern data standards, and scalable architectures, right? But also just the culture, right, in which we do that. The ability to provide that kind of culture in which it's okay to fail as long as you recover quickly and do things, right? And so we need to sort of think about that culture as being a key part of what the DoD does for software. Commandment number 5. Automate testing of software to enable critical updates to be deployed in days or weeks, not months or years. We're starting to hear examples of that, and that's exactly what should be happening, right? We need to get to the point where we can exploit automation to speed that development and to allow us to develop software that gets inside our adversary's OODA loop, right? That observe, orient, decide, act loop, right, that the adversaries are using against us. We need to be able to develop software faster than that so we can react to that, right? And we have to get there with the software that is really implementing, right, the warfighter mission, right? If we can't do that, frankly, we're screwed. So we just have to do that a lot better. Commandment number 6. Every purpose-built DoD software system should include source code as a deliverable. Okay, so source code. Why do you need source code? There are lots of reasons you need source code, but among them is the ability to check for correctness, security, and performance of software requires access to the source code. You cannot do this through a kind of test and evaluation process, right? And especially if, by the way, you want rapid deployment and other things, right? We have to be able to use tools that can peer into that source code and look for things, and there are modern tools that do that. So we think that source code needs to be a deliverable for purpose-built DoD software systems. Of course, not for something that's off the shelf getting used. That's a different case. That's a different type. But it also allows, of course, the possibility of local modification when that's needed and when that makes sense. And it really enhances our ability to rapidly deploy software. Okay, commandment number 7. Every DoD system that includes software should have a local team of DoD software experts who are capable of modifying or extending the software through source code or API access. We believe that the department needs to have software developers in the field. And in the field, these days can be virtualized, right? But in the field mentally means we are fighting that mission. We are making that system and that warfighter be able to do what they're talking about. Sometimes, depending on the mission and the software and other things, that includes the ability to customize that, and we need people who can do that customization. And so a software system needs people around that software system who are capable of modifying or extending that. Whether those people are in uniform people, civilians, contractors, okay, all of those are fine, right? Combinations of all of those, as we already heard, are fine. But there need to be those people that are there for those software systems. Commandment number 8. Run only operating systems that are receiving and utilizing regular security updates for newly discovered software vulnerabilities. The number of times that we go out, and Milo's the guy, and he says, that logo in the corner of the screen, that looks like you're running Windows XP. That can't possibly be right, because if someone were to break into the system, that would be a disaster. And we know that, right, this is an old operating system that's not receiving updates. You can't possibly be using that piece of code. Okay, you know the answer, right? It happens all the time. And the use of old operating systems not only creates known vulnerabilities that put us at risk, but it also limits our ability to deploy new capabilities, right? Who is writing code for Windows XP, right? I mean, that's just not the way the world works. How are we going to keep up with that cycle if we're running operating systems that are 10 years old, right, on all sorts of hardware that's, right, at least that old as well? So we need to run operating systems that are receiving and utilizing updates. Commandment number 9. This one's about data. Data should always be encrypted unless it's part of an active computation. This is something that we've learned from industry. Look, let's face it, we should assume that our adversaries are trying to gain access to our data every single way they can, right? And you say, hey, I've got a secure data link, no problem. What's feeding that data link, right? Oh, well, that data link is coming off of something that could get intercepted, right? Oh, geez, now we got a huge problem, right? Because even though it was encoded across the link, right, it wasn't encoded on the disk or it wasn't encoded at the input to that link. We believe that data needs to be encrypted everywhere unless it's part of an active computation. And of course, for different types of software, right, this may not be possible. When you're looking at that embedded one that's got tight timing requirements, et cetera, you may have to protect it differently for a while until we get to a level, right, where we can do things quickly enough in terms of encryption and decryption. But it should be the mindset that people are trying to get at those data, and those data need to be encrypted at all times, right, in motion and at rest. Finally, commandment number 10. All data generated by DoD systems in development and deployment should be stored, mined, and made available for machine learning. So Bess talked a little bit about this in the context just of the procurement process and other things and how we do cost estimates, but data is a strategic asset for the Department of Defense. All data. The data streaming off of weapons platforms, the data that's being taken that's telling us how the system is performing in operations, in exercises, in field tests, right? All of those things. We need to save and use data in all of those situations. We need to use those data to feed machine learning pipelines and other things in order to improve performance. So Those are the 10 commandments that we put forward, version 0.14. And so, we anticipate updating these as we go and we learn more. We know that many of these are things that, some of them are ones like, yeah, of course. Some of them are ones like, yeah, no way. Fine. The point, of course, is to say these are the types of things that the Department of Defense needs to be thinking about in the context of software, and that we saw as the 10 things that we wrote down in our kind of initial thinking about this. And our hypothesis is that these are, the things that we want to move forward with as we proceed on this study. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Eric Schmidt to kind of just take responsibility for the board and making comments.
So I have a proposed additional commandment.
Okay.
Which is, quote, "Thou shalt count the number of programmers you actually have," unquote.
This is a common Eric question, by the way.
So again, this is we're having a feedback conversation for you to think about this, but it seems to me that in our meeting so far, we've seen many helper types, supporters, planners, document writers, and so forth. But it's a very rare event when we have a meeting with what I would consider to be programmers. And one of my most fun questions is to sit in a room with 20 executives, shall we say, and say how many programmers, and it turns out there'll be 2, of which 1 is being transferred for some stupid reason to some other base. Right? In other words, it's really a problem that the definition of being a programmer, as is earlier testified in our public comments here, if you don't measure it, it's not going to happen. So do you guys have some thoughts on that?
Well, I think part of the question there is trapped in the nature of all the different contractors that are working on different systems. You may have programmers in different edges, but they're not building on a common source base. The stuff is delivered piecemeal.
As usual, Milo, you're making it more complicated. I just want to count. Right? No. It's literally if there's a person over here in this contractor and a person over there, it's useful to know if there's 2 or if there's 0.2 and 0.2. I agree with you that there's every other known computer science problem exists as well.
Sure.
But you're not going to solve them without getting programmers.
No, I would just point out that this organization, the Department of Defense, cannot complete a financial audit.
Yeah.
Right? So there are tracking problems, right, with this.
And just on the tracking problem, I'll point out, George pointed this out, right? There is not currently a code that says this is somebody who is a programmer, a data scientist, or other things. And, we've talked about, and we'll talk more about, the need to really think about having a career track, and part of having a career track is being able to track.
I'm sorry to be obnoxious about this, but it seems to me that you need programmers in order to write code. I think that's the definition of what a programmer does. And I think software is defined as written software, which is written by programmers. So I'm concerned that we're going to establish all of this, which is obviously, in my view, obviously correct. So I don't have any other criticisms. But then everyone will say, oh, well, we have now the 10 commandments and we've measured it and so forth, but we'll have forgotten that you need programmers to implement it.
Right.
Great point.
I agree. So commandment number 11, real coders write real code. How many are there?
Right.
Or some variant of that.
Though you could also do a permutation on recommendation 1, which is not just abundant compute infrastructure, but abundant compute programmers as well.
And you need my recommendation is I'd modify number 1 to say, and you need programmers to program.
Right.
And some variant. And can program managers. I would like to have. Okay, I understand what a programmer is. They sit in front of a computer all day and they write code in some computer language. That's the number of people I want to count. Right? Okay. You can choose your language and count them in whole units of humans. Okay. We'll add 0.5 here, 0.2 here. We'll add it up. Okay.
Eric, you do know we're working on machine language programming, right? Where AI will actually code.
I'm looking forward to the period when only we need executives. At the moment, we only have executives, and I'd like to have some programmers.
But there'll be this period in between.
Now, maybe we should ask, on the phone we have a number of our members who've been patiently listening. Can we get some comments from them? Is it possible digitally to do so?
So we have Jen, Marnie, and Walter?
Okay, well, while we're trying to make that happen.
Are they visual?
No.
Okay, Eric? Anyway, next comment from whomever.
Well, I would just say on a couple points, this issue about abundance, right? It is truly amazing that, sort of common sense standards, like you would go to a major base and find that they have less bandwidth than what your cable company delivers to you, right? This is just cannot be an acceptable state of affairs. If you live most of us live in places where we don't have to go upgrade the utility fee to our house when we buy a new appliance. But that isn't the way the Department of Defense deals with its communication or its compute infrastructure. And so I think that nature, the other dynamic is we find that people don't even aspire to deal with sort of modern compute because of the constrained environment that they've grown up in. And there's a huge cost issue here because the department spends, it's not clear the department knows how much it spends on IT, but the number is in several billions of dollars a year at a minimum. And the amount of capability it receives for this does not appear to be rational. So I think one of the things that we can do is think about unit cost structures. What is the department's unit cost for compute, from storage or bandwidth? And the department should manage to a commercial reduction, right, every year, right? In most large organizations, the cost of compute is falling every year, and IT organizations are held accountable to drive reductions in unit cost. So as the department moves to leasing or compute as a service, it becomes easier to track unit cost and drive those numbers down. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement in that space.
I wanted to ask you guys, these are spectacular commandments. I wanted to ask you about, at least the earlier rev of the 10 Commandments, the ones that came down from Mount Sinai, sound good, but they don't always work in implementation because humans are kind of imperfect. So I'm curious, what do you think are going to be the commandments that most face active opposition? Some will fail because of neglect, and some will fail because there's actually active opposition. And so if we're going to make sure that these commandments really stick, we have to understand the failure modes of these. And I want to start at that end where there are people who really have a vested interest in somehow defeating these commandments.
So I'll start and maybe turn it to Richard or Milo. The two that strike me as the hardest, one is the budget issue. There are, unfortunately, in the department, or fortunately, there are people who budget for development and there are people who budget for sustainment. And that is just completely orthogonal to what needs to be done here. So on one hand, you can say the approach to the problem is that needs to be fixed. On the other hand, in answer to your question, there are people for whom fixing that problem is anathema. So I think that's point number one. Mm-hmm. I think the second is, I think it's not a simple statement for many people to say, you should give us your source code. Yeah. I think, obviously, source code, there's lots of reasons for us to have that recommendation. Richard detailed those reasons. I think they're very compelling. It is also the case that source code is the economic livelihood of the private sector who provides that source code. So that nut is going to have to be cracked as to how you revalue software. You can take hardware and you can pay people to develop hardware, and then you can pay people to supply hardware, and you can make a margin on the hardware. And if your economic model is, I do the software because I have to, because you're going to buy the hardware, and then you say, give me the software, it's a challenge. So we're going to have to we collectively are going to have to deal with the implications of that. So I think those are the two hardest ones here.
So can I just understand, what part of your recommendation or commandments is with respect to the first one, which is the software system procurement color of money doesn't work? Are you saying in
number three?
In number three, but you're not saying that the system that you're working in needs to be changed? you're saying the budget needs to reflect how the system allocates costs.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think we see people doing workarounds, right? We see people figuring out how to get the current colors of money to map what needs to be done. I think the problem is that that works up to a certain size, and it works when you can use other transaction authorities and other things so that you don't trigger all of that. So it may well be that in terms of implementing commandment number 3, that is that budget should support the full iterative life cycle of software, that cannot be done, right, at a certain scale in the current procurement system. Right? I would argue that saying software is different and saying we're going to procure software differently than we procure hardware would be a better way to start than trying to say we're going to somehow use our current system, right, and do it that way.
So why are you not saying that? We say that in our other recommendations.
We do, and maybe that's the way we should sharpen this one up, right? Is to not leave it implicit, right? That in order to do this, by the way, you're going to have to change this. Just say you're going to have to change this.
I just get upset when you start talking about requirements, specs,
Yep.
so forth. Modern software is not built that way. Software is a continuous process. It should be budgeted with a single team, which has a physically known number of programmers, I might add. And it's like there's 30 of them, and we're going to add 10% every year, and their budgets are going to go up in their salaries, and so forth. That's how it's in fact done. Software costs don't go to zero; they go up, not down. Those sorts of things. And we have a great deal of experience of how to do this. It's just not reflected in the way the DoD does it.
Yeah, the subtle way we've written it, budget should be constructed to support.
Right.
Could mean there should be a lot of lines for different colors of money. And we really don't mean that. So that one we're probably being just a little too gentle.
Yeah, and again, if you go read the paragraph that follows that, it will be a little bit more explicit, but pulling that up into the bold letters that are the part that go on the
history
screen,
says
right?
they read the commandments on the tablets. The commentary people read sometimes.
And they get reinterpreted later, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly.
It seems to me that if you have two things you have identified as your hardest problems, the second one is one which is going to be a complicated negotiation over intellectual property ownership, rights, and so forth and so on. The first one is also a complicated negotiation, but you might as well propose your solution in the first one. In the second one, which you identified as getting the source code, I think what you're referring to there is a license to see the source code. You're not suggesting to transfer all the intellectual property from the contractor to the DoD, or are you?
Well, again, I think there are a couple of pieces to that. So one is that the source code should be a deliverable. That means the source code should be accessible, right, to the DoD. That does not mean, as you just said, necessarily transferring the IP, allowing, say, the DoD to sell it to somebody else, or use it. Not at all, right? But rather, modern checking of software for security, for correctness, and other things works a lot better if you have the source code to check against.
Yeah, but what about modifying it?
Well, and again, we believe that, and it's a separate commandment, that it should also be possible to modify certain types of software. I would argue that software that is being used to implement the mission, that's like the tactics. You're using the software, the algorithm, right, as part of, right, the way in which you implement those tactics. And that's something the DoD should own. And that ownership might include being able to modify the software.
The ability to modify that software.
And that's different from saying the software that's running at the lowest level of a jet engine controller or a full authority digital engine controller, type of situation. Those are different types of software. They'll have different requirement or commandments that apply.
Yeah, I would just add, Eric, I think there's a third one which is also going to be difficult, and that is this issue about testing, right? At Google, we have a motto which is debugging sucks, but testing rocks, right? And the department's current model for how it thinks about how it tests software is just wrong, right? Because you're trying to put it into service and doing functional tests the way you would do hardware testing. That doesn't work, right? Well, it can work, but you're not going to catch many bugs that way. And I think part of the challenge is, that goes back to the issue about source code. It's not just source code for a system, for a component, but source code of the entire system, because most of these systems are composed of a lot of different units. And to do adequate testing, you have to actually have a model that you can run through. And if you're going to do the DevOps model, that means you have to be able to build every night, right? And you have to be able to test. And if it takes the government 6 months to test something that you're building and trying to release every week,
There's
right?
some mismatch.
There's going to be a problem. So if we fix the problem in software development, but we don't deal with acceptance testing and the government testing process properly, there's an issue there. And I will also just say we have this Marxist doctrine about how the government values software as lines of code. I mean, who does that anymore, right? Labor theory of value is sort of core Marxist doctrine, and it's alive and well in the Department of Defense.
I've never seen lines of code equated to a Marxist doctrine. Is this something
lines
you've
of
never-
value theory.
It's labor theory of value. How many lines of code do I generate, right? It's
Sweat of the brow.
right, exactly right. That is not the way we want to be thinking about refactoring code, how we use open source libraries and other things.
So
Keystrokes.
you would be in favor of creative destruction a la Schumpeter?
always in favor.
As one of the relatively few political conservatives on the board, I should say, I believe in capitalism, and I think that capitalist process for creating software is not one based on labor theory of value. And so we need to reward creativity. And I think also the dynamic of how you optimize, where you refactor, right, for efficiency. Right. You're constantly going to be going back and fixing things. The hardware platforms that these systems run on evolve over time, right? The F-22 software runs on a VAX. I don't know, how many of you here know what a VAX is, right? There are old folks like us, right?
Where's the guy
it's
who had his hand up the whole
0.6.
He's still using
a VAX, huh?
The current air superiority fighter for the United States, most advanced fighter aircraft we have, uses its primary onboard computer is a 0.6 MIP, 0.6 million instruction per second computer who hasn't been in production for I don't know how long, right?
Decade.
And that is the current air superiority fighter. So this is it's just, my cell phone has way more compute power than that aircraft does. So it's that as we change the hardware out, how do you think about debugging and testing in those kind of environments, right? How do you take advantage of that? How do you profile code? That's all in modern software development. We have to be thinking about our compute platforms changing. So I think that's one of the other things that we need to figure out, how to get the baseline compute evolution going along with the software.
And that's maybe a good lead into a set of things. Well, I'll let Eric talk. Did we manage to get our other board members online?
I think Jen is back.
Okay. So you might want Eric to just take comments from people.
Jen, go ahead.
Oh, no, it's Marnie.
Oh, Marnie, okay.
Hi, Marnie.
Hey, Marnie.
Sorry, Marnie.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I have to say, I'm so sorry for not being there in person, but I have to say this is the most amusing conversation from afar, and I really miss you guys. I just wanted to, I thought I would just, first of all, I think the 10 Commandments are great. They really resonate with me. In some ways, they're equally as good as the first 10 Commandments. I thought I would just underscore on commandment number 2, which I really liked, which is about, starting small, being iterative, and building on the success, and then terminating quickly if it doesn't work. Yeah. That one particularly resonated. We are, at Instagram, we are kind of almost like a company within a company. And, we would probably like to have more resources than we do, but it's had the great effect of, really focusing the thinking, and it has led to kind of a core value that we have, which is do the simple thing first. So, we operate as a lean company, and the core value serves as a reminder and forcing function for us to work in a constrained, thoughtful way. So we focus on the problem that we're trying to solve and the consumer job that we're trying to fill. And we start simply, but we manage the quality of our launches, and we try to be thoughtful about minimizing any sort of technical debt. And I just wanted to sort of emphasize that doing the simple thing first doesn't mean cutting corners and purely focusing on speed. It's about really zeroing in on the simplest solution for the user need, and then solving it in the best way without over-engineering. And then, testing and learning in some cases, and paying attention to the data. So I think this works in the private sector. I think it applies equally here in this context based on everything I heard earlier. And then I just wanted to add one other comment, which was about commandment number 4. One of the themes from the presentations earlier was all about psychological safety. And I think that that's so important as part of adopting a DevOps culture for software systems. I mean, for us in particular, we want to make sure that engineers or the programmers, that the actual programmers that Eric was referring to, feel ownership for the success of their code end to end, and making sure that they have, a close partnership between development and operations. That if something does go wrong, say an unexpected bug, that we don't come down hard on a specific individual, but we go through a process of, going through and identifying a root cause analysis, using the tools that have been developed early on to make sure that we can get to the roots of the problem, quickly and easily. And so I just thought that this point about psychological safety was so important and needs to be underscored as part of commandment number 4.
That's very good. Let me do this first.
Okay, thank you. Michael wanted to do something?
Yeah, is Jen on? Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm here. I will add on to Marnie's comments also. Miss you guys and sorry that I am not there. But just picking up where she left off, this notion of blameless postmortems is one of the sort of industry terms, I believe, for what Marnie's describing. And there's a real, this is a practice one can adopt and is known. It does not need to be invented. I just also, when I look at these excellent 10 commandments, also just think about how deeply they are tied into hiring and recruitment goals and procedures, and I just cannot get out of my head the both Captain Kroger's notion that there isn't a talent shortage, that people in the DoD want to do this and have the skills, and that we need to elevate them, but also the size of the problem if we were to have trained software developers on absolutely every DoD procurement, the number of people that we would need to get into those positions properly trained, either from existing talent pool or bringing them in. It is a truly huge problem, and that is an underlying need of to fulfill all of these commandments.
Walter on? Okay.
Thank you, Jen and Marnie. Now, and my comment is on number 1, I would probably add a comma, especially in operational systems. Yeah. I think that at least the headline of number 1, make computing, storage, and bandwidth abundant to developers. You tend to think that means the big systems in buildings and so forth. But I think what you're really talking about is the real crisis is that we're flying around with 0.6 MIPS faxes operationally, right? I've seen VAX emulators on PCs.
Yeah,
right, that are faster than the VAX.
No, it's a truly ugly situation. It's uglier even than the MIT logo.
You can only go so far with Milo. Let me.
Milo.
I really wish we were there.
Marnie says he's really rusty shoes.
Let me just 3 additional points that we have been carrying, not as commandments, but just to give you context. They actually all got mentioned in the course of the discussion here. 1, I want to reiterate a recommendation that the DIB has continually made. We talked a little bit about it before, which is to make sure we establish computer science, computer engineering, and programming as core competency disciplines within the DoD, the uniform service, and the non-uniform service. So if you count programmers, you have to be able to say who's a programmer, and you have to give them a career. It's not a good idea when the programmer who's been working on Kessel Run for 2 years, the next thing that they're doing is a logistics officer moving something around somewhere on a boat. That's not going to help us become the kind of software-driven enterprise we want. And I would point out that, as we have discovered, you can be a doctor for your career, you can be a lawyer for your career, and you can be a musician for your career, but you cannot be a software engineer for your career in the military. Second, additional thought recommendation is, and I talked about the 4 different kinds of software. I would just reiterate again, to the maximum extent possible, use commercial software for business processes that are done everywhere in the world. Don't modify them. Don't talk about how much better they are because you're unique. Just go buy them, buy platform as a service, and execute the software. And the third, and Milo mentioned this a little bit, we think it's really important to be thinking about hardware life cycles much shorter where it is possible, particularly when it's coupled to the kind of software we're talking about here. So when you do a hardware refresh every 10 years.
IT hardware.
IT hardware. When you do a hardware refresh every 10 years, it is next to impossible to think about how you're going to continuously evolve software. You're going to do software once, and 10 years from now, you're going to start completely over. So we have to be thinking about a hardware refresh cycle that's on the 2 or 3 year time frame. So
that's one way.
That's one solution to the problem.
Yeah.
So
I think it's important just to also build on that. It used to be components were manufactured for much longer periods of time. Now, because the technology evolution cycle is so much faster, semiconductors stop being manufactured, parts stop being manufactured, and the department has to pay increasing amounts of money to keep obsolete stuff in production or manufacturable on demand to support these old legacy systems. And so I think that did not used to be as big a problem. I think that problem is going to get worse going forward, and so we have to deal with it.
So, Eric, as Michael said at the beginning, this is our kind of hypothesis. This is what we would like to put forward as our interim report to Congress. I think we have to have the board endorse that, and so we'll hand it back to you.
I want the record to show that the board thinks the MIT logo is excellent.
Although possibly not unanimously.
Yes. Okay,
and it is not a matter on which the board will be deliberating.
That is correct. Look, I didn't bring it up. So it seems to me that my reaction is the first. I think we should say good job for a starting point. I think what I would suggest is that we formally approve taking the start plus modifications minus Milo's comments. Including Milo's comments. And then iterate. So begin the iterative process.
Yes.
So let me call for a vote. Is everyone in favor of continuing the process that we started now and turning this eventually into a more formal report?
Yes.
Richard, Michael, I assume
Yes.
is a yes.
Yes.
Milo and Eric are, and then
Yes.
Jen and Marnie.
Both said yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thanks, guys.
thank you.
Okay, so have we done what we needed to do, Josh, from a procedure perspective?
Yes, we have.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent.
Eric, there is one other thing. We have been discussing also about, can we create a set of metrics for software development that can tell whether or not a program is on track or not? And I think certainly in the DevOps model, we have many incremental opportunities to tell whether a program is on track. But if the department could actually use get useful reports out of programs to know when they're not on track, when they need extra help, or when they need to be terminated early, that would be a real, I think, helpful process. We certainly use those metrics in our own industries. And so I know we've had some conversations on it. I think that's an area where we also want to spend some time on.
Yep, good. Okay.
Great.
Well done. Thank
Okay,
you, guys.
Josh, let's go ahead. Thank you.
Great, excellent. Thank you very much. So we will post the next briefing on our website, and you have our URL in your program. We will also be able to receive comments from you about anything that you heard today or anything in the future so that the public can also contribute to this. Your next opportunity for that also is these comment cards. So while I give this quick update to the board, be thinking about what comments you might want to make, pass those into the aisles. My team will collect them, and we'll use that as a way of inviting you to come to the microphone here and sort of allow a queue to form and give you a chance to make those comments. Let me also just start right away saying that I'm not going to talk about every detail and every bullet or read these slides to you, but I did want to offer a few highlights to the board about that. So a couple of procedural points. First, I want to remind everyone here, the board is a federal advisory committee, and it provides advice, and it has no authority to implement anything. So the information I'm providing is on behalf of the Office of the Secretary of Defense. We give these implementation updates at all of our meetings because we think it's extremely important for the public and the board and the department to keep focus on the idea that these recommendations are not being provided into a void or a vacuum. They're here to be acted upon. And I also want to let everyone know that our next meeting will be at DIUX in their California location in Mountain View on July 11th. And we hope that you'll join us there in person if you can, or that you'll tune into the live feed. So there's no way to encompass all the different things the department is doing that could be categorized as innovation or even related to the 14 areas where the board has written and approved recommendations, but we did want to offer a few highlights in specific areas that we think are especially important, and in particular important to this question of software the board's exploring. So the number one recommendation that the board put forward was this notion of building workforce capacity for innovation, and that goes beyond the technical training for programming and software engineering, but it gets a lot of other important methodologies that some of our earlier speakers recommended. So you heard Jen talking about how they use lean startup principles and ICOR methodology, and we know that Admiral Hahn has talked about that. You heard Brian talking about human-centered design and Agile and these techniques and design thinking. There's a lot more that goes into building that capacity than simply all the technical skills that the department also needs to master. So one of the things that we mentioned, obviously, was Brian's work with the Air Force Lifecycle Management Center, but I also wanted to highlight Marine Corps Installation and Logistics and their recent symposium. And one of those recommendations that they've adopted is leading to the creation of one of these important centers, which is allowing those techniques to be used, things like hackathons, crowdsourcing, these online platforms, collaboration portals. So we welcome this. The Marine Corps is really leading the way in this area. The third recommendation the board put forward, and this was really a lot of the work that Adam Grant, one of our leaders on the board, has done, was around experimentation and creating a culture of experimentation, which I think goes hand in hand with that notion of psychological safety that's been mentioned several times. One I think is so important is a pilot program, an experiment the Air Force is doing around talent management. I can't emphasize how crucial this is or how shocking that this is in fact new. But it is that now airmen are being allowed to have data about what are the vacancies and availabilities of positions and can go through a bidding process to have that transparency, that online marketplace where they get to try to slot themselves into specific positions where there is a need or a demand. So they're bringing a lot of transparency into this process in 6 career fields. It will affect 18,000 airmen to begin. And I think this is an experiment that has the potential to lead the way to a whole host of new talent management approaches for all the services that would give individual service members much more say and influence over where they want to steer their career. And obviously the needs of the services come first, but we really need to understand what are the talents and skills that our service members have and what is their purpose and their goal and their development path, and how do we marry those two things up. So the Air Force is really leading the way there. I just wanted to highlight that. Recommendation number 5 has in many ways been the most important argument the board has been making, and that is the central significance of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I'm very pleased to say that we have now had, I believe, a breakthrough in the department's view on what needs to happen in the field of AI, and that is the recent announcement by the Secretary and recently the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering that the department will this year launch a joint AI center. We think this is clearly traces back to the board's early work on articulating the need and offering up a design for an AI center. And I want to highlight that to this audience in particular because some of the most important work in the field of AI and machine learning is happening just steps away from this auditorium, and we are going to need all of the help we can get to make sure that we sustain a competitive advantage. And not only that we adopt these technologies, but we do so in an ethical and responsible way consistent with our democratic values, and that the first military that adopts AI does it the way that we would want the American Republic to do so. We will need your help for that. Recommendation number 6 gets at acquisition issues, and we mentioned the F-35 several times here today, obviously a top priority considering the size and scope of this program. As Bess mentioned, one of the important things is bringing in that key software expertise. And so Ellen Lord, who's responsible for the F-35, has brought in this Chief Technology Officer of Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute to be her advisor on software. And so this is an example of us taking one of the leading thinkers at one of the top research centers on software and giving them a position of influence, right next to a key decision maker. We're actually hoping we can have a breakthrough this year on the F-35. With respect to recommendation number 10 that came up several times in our conversation about software, I wanted to highlight something I thought was particularly notable, which is the Defense Digital Service. I'm sure most of you are familiar. It's a franchise of the U.S. Digital Service that Jen helped create, Jen Palka, who's on the line, when she was serving in government. They have led, I think, a historic procurement asking industry to bid on the Joint Enterprise Defense Infrastructure, which will be the largest cloud procurement in the history of the department. This is not the only, but a major pathway for for the services to get access to modern commercial cloud, something that the Defense Innovation Board advocated at the very beginning. So this is a major change, and I would say you can go to the department's website and watch the Industry Day remarks. In particular, I want to highlight for you the remarks of Brigadier General Crum, who's the Deputy J8. He's responsible for requirements. His 15-minute speech about this on YouTube is amazing because it is a passionate connection between the importance of cloud computing to the mission of warfighters. And he talks about flying combat missions over Iraq and how he sees how this important breakthrough of this cloud contract and cloud computing and making it available to warfighters will have a transformational impact. And he really hits a lot of the points the board has made. And I think it's incredibly important to understand how this is the ability to support the work that you heard a lot of our speakers, Brian, Mike, others to do. And consistent with that move to cloud, Transcom has now been one of the first combatant commands to take this move where they have now adopted commercial cloud, and they are moving their data into the commercial cloud, and they're trying to do this for one of our most complex and important missions. The global supply chain that Transcom has to manage really cannot scale to the size and complexity of modern operations without use of cloud computing, and they have been pushing for this for years, and they have just made a major breakthrough. Last, I think another really important Air Force initiative I want to highlight was recently announced as the Squadron Innovation Fund. And so General Goldfein, who is the lead commander of the Air Force, recognizing the importance of giving that sense of psychological safety, has dedicated a significant sum of money, $64 million, to give at the squadron level, at that small unit level, the opportunity for them to have a little pile of money for them to figure out how to use to improve their mission. And they have a great degree of local control of those funds, which gives them the ability to do that experimentation, to have a little bit of resources. And we have already heard great ideas from airmen all over the country and over the world of how they would use the small infusion of resources to do big things with innovation. So this is another example of really elevating the airmen and other services at the ground floor. So last, after the board put forward their first 11 recommendations, they added one because they recognize the central importance of data to the first 11. And when we talk about the importance of recommendation number 5 in AI, all of you understand without the data to train the artificial intelligence, it won't be very useful. So the Air Force created a chief data officer position, and she has now made her top priority and her key initiative to assemble all that data, even data the Air Force doesn't know how to use yet, because they know that one day those correlations will be important. So those are just a few areas where I think we've seen a lot of progress and a lot of traction. If you look at these implementation briefings that we give quarterly, it paints a picture of significant, meaningful, and we hope enduring change across all the services in OSD. I thank all of you for your time today. Now, I'll offer you, Eric, a chance if you or any board want to say anything, and then after that, we'll go to the public.
Well, I think it's actually fantastic progress. It's well ahead of what I expected. So with that, I think we should just go to questions from the audience.
Great. Comments. Terrific. So please pass your comment cards into the aisle, and teammates will collect them, and we'll start calling on folks. And I think we've got a microphone here in the corner.
Any? No comments?
We may have a procedural problem here. So does anyone have a comment card? No pen. Oh, there you go. Okay. Well, someone will loan you a pen. In the meantime, why don't you go and make your comment?
Sorry about that. Okay, who has something in?
I have 2 comments actually.
Then why don't you get us started while we lag with the rest of us? But speak into the microphone so our. Okay, speak. You need to speak in the microphone so everybody can hear you.
ID yourself. Could you say your name and?
Hello. Oh. Hi, my name is Brandon Hanks. I am a developer for MIT, so I provide educational software for labs there. Actually, two comments. The first was in the 4 different kinds of descriptions of
Types of software.
One thing that you didn't mention at all was open source and how that fits into that framework. And then the second comment, which is related, is one of the comments that one of you had made was that the commandments could apply differently to the different categories. It just seems to me that if those commandments can't be applied universally, then maybe that they shouldn't be commandments.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
That's all.
So thank you very much for those comments. Do we have other people who would like to make comments? Yes, sir.
Greg Ingram. So I'm Greg Ingram. I work for a small startup, AI/ML startup, 4GI here, just right down the street in Cambridge. I'm the director of business development. So I'd like to get some thoughts from you guys on the DI/UX model and how to expand that. So I've been shaking the bushes of FedBizOps and my networks and stuff like that, various conferences. And even though a lot of the agencies out there say they can use OTA funding, the procedures like DUX has in process or not in process at those different agencies like DARPA, IARPA, AFRL, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very onerous for a non-traditional defense contractor, which means we don't do defense contracting right now, to do DCAA cost accounting and stuff like that. So I'd like to get a sense on what you guys are trying to push, which hopefully is what I'm trying to push, to get those processes down at the lower levels of the other agencies that are doing that kind of R&D and prototype funding.
I think in general, we're not supposed to respond to specific questions. Let me refer you to the colonel to start with, who's standing right here.
I have to say, when we go to California and Washington, we turn people away. Boston, I thought you were a more inquisitive lot. It's no problem ending early, but I did want to, so one last chance if anyone has a comment they'd like to make.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I have one more.
Please.
My name is Bo Young, and I'm a Major General in the Army Reserve, and we're currently, in order to let you know about some other things going on in the ecosystem, standing up what's currently called the 75th Innovation Command, which will be a nationwide command of approximately 1,500 folks, we think, whose the role is to take advantage of the private sector expertise, talent, and culture that we have in the Army Reserve, which is 200,000 folks, and to create a command that's essentially a distributed network of small teams that is designed to partner with government agencies as well as private sector organizations to bring private sector innovation and technology into the DoD faster. So we're partnered with Army Futures Command. We expect to be in direct support of that organization. We currently we've got the command designed and it's got the initial approvals. We think we'll be in initial operating capability this summer and full operating capability next summer. So anyway, we're excited about that, and I think it fits in with one of your earlier talks there about what other people in the DoD are doing to support the ecosystem. Thank you.
No, that's fantastic.
Well, I wonder if any of those 1,500 will be countable programmers.
Let's see if we have another question here. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Mike Dugan from Booz. I work with the Air Force a lot, and I think they're doing great things because they kind of missed a lot of the last 10 years of cloud churn, and now they're getting on with the good tools. They're starting 2018 and going forward. And I was kind of looking for, like, one of your commandments, maybe, because talk about a lot of DevOps and cybersecurity, and now DevSecOps. Maybe that should be just a baseline. Everything should be like a DevSecOps for tool sets to go with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, they say yes.
Hi, Matt Marighi from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University. Thank you again also for all the partnership with DIUX. I wanted to just mention, first of all, I think that everything is very much on point as far as the iterative process and glomming that onto the current acquisitions process for software. The one complication I think will probably come up that I think the DIB should take a look at, just be cognizant of, is the foreign military sales aspect. Because I used to work in that business for SAF-IA before I came up to the Fletcher School. It already is a complicated process in terms of getting existing off-the-shelf technology from the United States sold to other countries with disclosure and whatnot. You then add on complications when countries want to have their own specific variants and changes to hardware put in. And the one complication I see is in this iterative process that through the 2 to 3 year letter of offer and acquisition process that it takes to get something sold, let alone delivered, that there's probably going to be then complications on the contracting side to make sure that what gets promised actually gets delivered, and dealing with all of those requirements as they come up. So I don't know how exactly that will translate to the international sales process, but it's something I think that's worth considering when you bring this up to the Hill.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hey, good afternoon. My name is Janesse Simler, and I'm with the Boeing Company. Just recently joined. And with regard to commandment number 6, one of the recommendations I would have for the board as you not only go forward with the interim report, but then later on the final report to Congress, is to provide, obviously, one of the hardest nuts for this for industry will be purpose-built software that's developed at private expense. It's developed for DoD, but it was not funded by DoD. And delivering, and I understand the rationale behind the argument. But to think through, one of the points that you made that I thought was useful was that industry and DoD will have to think about different business models for pricing hardware and software. And so as you go through your work, one of the recommendations I would make is to flesh that out a little bit, to be more specific about those business models so that both policy makers and industry kind of stimulates their creative thinking in that rather than just simply putting it up.
Right. And one of the things we talked about in another context was, can you make software accretive to the revenue of the contractor?
Right.
In other words, can adoption of these new software principles actually result in real revenue or profits for them? Right. That'll accelerate this whole process.
I'm sorry, alibi on that. And also part of how the existing statutes and regulatory framework regarding competition throughout the life cycle of a program also plays into industry's willingness to provide and how they would price source code and software.
Thank you.
Hi, Charlene Stokes with MITRE. I'd just like to make the comment of emphasizing, or really foot stomping, I think the comment that was online about the importance of the selection and the training. Really focusing on the fact that culture itself, changing a culture is an iterative process. It's not going to be an easy fix, obviously. You know that, but the same as you're commenting with the software, right? We need to take an iterative approach in how we go about that. That's going to be a big, hard problem to solve. I think we're dealing with, as an industrial organizational psychologist and also somebody who's been in the DoD for 12 years, kind of working my way up through there, there's two kind of challenge areas that seem like they could potentially conflict. So thinking about how you might want to approach that in the future. To Colonel McKinley's comment on how do we incentivize and inspire these people, right? Because sometimes they can get away with not doing things, right? Because they don't have to face the door like it is in the industry side, right? And then compare that with all the other great comments on the psychological safety and the software side and the innovation side. How do we encourage them and inspire them? And I think it really comes back to starting at that very beginning, even with K through 12 initiatives, right? At that really early stage of changing how things are, selecting the right people with the right mindset, improving on that growth mindset and giving them that opportunity to flourish.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is John Conley. I'm with Sienna Communications. One of the things that I thought might be missing and might be better addressed in your 10 commandments is how does industry, or how do you make it easier for industry to get software into the government? You know, specifically around the area of certifications. You know, and I'll give a great example. I applaud, you know, the use of open source within both within all areas of the government. But every time you bring your platform into the government, their head explodes, right? You got to go get that recertified. There might be some small considerations made around operating systems. And it seems to me that if you're going to go down this road, government should take ownership for the certification of these platforms. And if you built your software using these components, and I won't call them out by name, but there's a number of them out there, that you don't have to go through the full recertification effort every single time. And I'm talking, I will use some names, things like Nagios, things like Red Hat, different variants of Unix. It seems like every time we walk in the door, people want to know if it'll run on a VAX, right? So just something to consider.
Thank you very much. And I think, sir, you have the honor of the last comment.
I guess I better make this good. Jeremy Kriegel from the Broad. I have to say I was very encouraged by a lot of what I heard today around bringing product development practices up to par with industry. It just occurred to me that for the DoD, I wonder, is that enough to be on par with industry, and maybe what will the DoD be doing to leapfrog what is best practices now and kind of innovate and discover the next generation of product development best practices?
Thank you. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for that. Josh, are we pretty much done?
We are. So I'll ask you to give a few closing remarks and then I have a couple admin notes.
Well, I actually thought the meeting was fantastic, even with Milo present. And I thought the presentations, I want to thank you guys again. I don't think it could have gone better. I like the software report a lot. I think we've got a lot of work to do. I think the comments from our audience were, again, the best we've seen. So I think it only gets better from here. Do you agree?
No, I thought it was a very useful meeting. I think the guests that came to address us, we had some very good input from them, and I think that'll help generate a better product for us.
So maybe we should thank Josh and his team for having the good judgment of inviting all these smart people.
Indeed.
So thank you guys. Michael, Marnie, Jen, Michael, Richard, any other comments?
I'm all good.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll see you soon.
Great, everyone. So if you would please just stay in your seats for a few more seconds, that will allow our board members to go to their next meeting. And if you are a member of the media and you'd like to participate in the media availability, please meet Lieutenant Colonel Andrews, who will be standing right here, and he will take you where you need to go. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. Okay.